Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein. Thank you all for joining me again today as we do the next Beatitude from Emmet Fox's book, Sermon on the Mount. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from the first one, and I'm excited to get into the second one. Emmet Fox is really somebody that's had a significant impact on a lot of people's lives, and mine is no exception. So I'm grateful to be able to present this information and read it along. And thank everybody that's been tuning in and taking a listen. And I'm excited to continue on through this chapter. So a little bit of context again for just to set the scene, set the stage. We are doing the Beatitudes out of chapter 2 of Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount book. We're not doing the entire thing. We're just going to do the Beatitudes. So we did the first one last week, which was blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? And today we are going to be doing the second one, which is blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted, right? So, and this is a copy I'm reading out of. This is a 1938 printing. And I like to get as close to original as I can, purely for the sake of reprints can really get a little dicey sometimes, I've found. And so I'm grateful to be able to have this available to me to be able to use and read out of. So let's get to it then. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to read the entire Beatitude. And then after I'm done with the reading, I'll go through it and give my feedback about it and kind of highlight some points that were important for me and my understanding of a lot of these things. So I'll go ahead and read it straight through and then little bits and pieces and kind of go through the whole thing. So here we go. This is I said James Allen for so long, I almost said it again. This is Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount, chapter 2, the Beatitudes, and this is the second Beatitude. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Here we go. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning or sorrow is not in itself a good thing, for the will of God is that everyone should experience happiness and joyous success. Jesus says, I am come that they might have, and that they might have it more abundantly. Nevertheless, trouble and suffering are often extremely useful, because many people will not bother to learn the truth until driven to do so by sorrow and failure. Sorrow then becomes relatively a good thing. Sooner or later, every human being will have to discover the truth about God and make his own contact with him at first hand. He will have to acquire the understanding of truth which will set him free once and for all from our three-dimensional limitations and their concomitant sin, sickness, and death. But most people will not undertake the search for God wholeheartedly unless driven thereto by trouble of some kind. There is really no need for man to have trouble, because if he will only seek God first, the trouble need never come. He always has the choice of learning by spiritual unfoldment or of learning by painful experience, and it is his own fault if he makes the latter choice. As a rule, it is only when health is broken down and ordinary medical means have failed to afford relief that people seriously set about gaining the spiritual understanding of the body as a true embodiment of divine life. That is our only guarantee of overcoming sickness and, ultimately, death. Yet if people would turn to God and acquire something of this understanding, while their health is still good, they need never be sick at all. Again, it is usually only when people are feeling the pinch of poverty very acutely, That is, when ordinary material sources of supply have dried up, that they turn to God as the last resort and learn the lesson that divine power really is the source of man's supply and all material agents but the channels. Now, this lesson has to be learned and thoroughly realized before man can pass on to any experience higher and or wider than the present one. In our Father's house are many mansions, but the key to higher mansions is always acquiring of complete dominion over the one in which we are. It is therefore a very blessed thing for us that we should be compelled to go right on the supply question at the earliest possible moment. If prosperous, people will now, while they are still prosperous, acknowledge God as their true source and pray regularly for still more spiritual understanding on this point. They need never suffer poverty or financial trouble at all. At the same time, they must be careful to use their present resources well, not hoarding riches selfishly, but recognizing that God is the owner and that they are only the stewards or trustees for him. The command of money involves a responsibility which you cannot evade. You must dispense it wisely or take the consequences. This general principle applies to every one of our difficulties, not merely physical or financial troubles, but all the other ills to which flesh is heir. Family troubles, quarrels and estrangements, sin and remorse, and all the rest need never come at all if we seek first the kingdom of God and right understanding. But if we will not do so, then come they must. And for us this morning will be a blessing in disguise. For through it we shall be comforted, in quotes. And by comfort, the Bible means the experience of the presence of God, which is the end of all mourning. The Orthodox churches have too often taught a crucified Christ finishing on the cross, but the Bible gives us the risen Christ triumphant. That's a good one. This one was fun to reread again for myself and go through and be reminded of things. And excuse the stumbling over the, let me see if I can say it again. Concomitants, sin, sickness, and death. So those were the things that comes along with this physical plane, this physical body. So, really, really enjoyed this Beatitude, though. I love the principle behind it. My story is in this Beatitude. My journey of spirituality and how it started is talked about here. And I have since at least attempted and learned that it's possible to practice the search for God without the pain and sorrow, but I'm not the greatest at it. I still get reminded regularly that I try to do things my way, and that's not always the best way. Most of the time it's not. I've gotten a lot better about it, though. So I'm excited to get into this one. I've like most times I've taken notes on this whole thing, but so you might see me pull up a notebook. But the Beatitude itself is really quite fantastic. Just the way it's laid out. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Just in general, that's a comforting statement to hear, isn't it? At least it was for me. Blessed are they who mourn, right? Because it doesn't mean you're forgotten. It doesn't mean God's reached out and smited you, or he's reached out and you're paying some penance for these things as God's doled out to you, I guess. If you are mourning, you are one of the blessed ones. Because what we find out is that means you're on this path of self-discovery. You're on this path of turning to God. And what a beautiful thing that is, right? And then the promise directly after, for they shall be comforted. That's peace and that's solace. That's comfort in and of itself. Just that Beatitude is for those struggling with very painful grief and loss and mourning. Just to read that sentence can uplift someone's spirits. Grief and loss and mourning were very important or relevant or wrapped up in my early recovery, early sobriety. So when I actually had to go through this, it was nice to know that you can grow from those things. You can change and you can learn. So, blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And his expansion on this is really, it's just quite fantastic. It's a wonderful, but short, but wonderful reading. So let's go ahead and we'll get into it. And the first thing he immediately identifies is the fact that mourning itself doesn't feel like a good thing. No one likes to feel, at least in the beginning. I don't know if anyone actually likes to feel it. I've come to be grateful for it, but the feeling of mourning or loss and sorrow and grief, and that's a painful experience. And he comes right out the front of this thing saying, "Hey, we know you don't have a good understanding or a good impression or association with the word mourning and sorrow. So it's okay, that's fine. We're gonna talk about it, right? So mourning or sorrow is not in itself a good thing." And then he goes directly into, and I do believe this to be true, for the will of God is that everyone should experience happiness and joyous success, right? What I've found is when I've gotten out of the way of myself in my recovery and in my life, meaning I've been able to stand on principle and allow life to turn out as it may, I find peace, joy, and contentment in there. I find strength and serenity there, right? And I do believe that is the natural state for a human being, is to be joyful, is to be happy, is to be serene and peaceful in a moment. I just never knew what that felt like till I started doing this work. And I started to actually take these things seriously and be willing to change some things about myself. And because that's happened and I've had the experiences that I've had, I've come to believe that God does, the God of my understanding. I'll make an effort to say it as in that way for this podcast, purely for an easier, more digestible way for some people who might not believe or might have some association or prejudice towards the word God. But so I'll try to include that God of my understanding. But I do believe that our natural state as we grow closer to the God of our understanding is peace and joy and happiness. So these senses of mourning really are our own doing. And that's been my experience. That has definitely been my experience. So what he goes on to say is mourning and sorrow is not objectively a good thing, in the sense, like, no, like, it's not something that many people would say, oh, that feels good. I'm grateful. I'm going through this in the immediate moment. But mourning, grief, suffering, loss, pain, these are the things that lead us on a path. These are the things that let us progress forward in our spiritual journey. Now, I want to say here, I would not go out in search of them. If you're trying to find things that make you hurt, that's an ego-driven, fruitless pursuit. But when these things arise in your life And for some, there's a lot in this immediate moment. You have opportunities to take a look at that. And you can use these emotions, though we don't like feeling them, as a tool to find the path you need to be walking, as a tool to find your winding road back to whatever it is that you want to call God. It's a very useful tool. It's kind of like a compass, actually. You can view it as a path, as a directing or guiding force, because the more pain there is, the deeper that sense of pain, the deeper that emotion and feeling has its roots into you, the more effort and the more willingness you will have to seek the truth. How did he say it? Nevertheless, trouble and suffering are often extremely useful, because many people will not bother to learn the truth until driven to do so by sorrow and failure. Your pain is a direct result of the space that you've created between you and the God of your understanding. That's really what it boils down to in a nutshell. So it becomes a positive thing. You can actually put a positive association eventually, after you've had enough experiences, with these emotions, with this sense of mourning and loss and failure. And he goes on, and I really enjoy this. Oh, actually, I did want to mention one other thing. It says, sorrow. I wrote down that sorrow is a pathway to peace. And for those that know that what the serenity prayer is, many people in recovery, the sobriety world know, 12-step world know the serenity prayer, but many do outside of it as well. But there's that second stanza, I think it says, hardship is the pathway to peace. And that's exactly what Emmet Fox is pointing at, saying sorrow is the pathway to peace. Sorrow is the pathway to truth, which therefore peace is a side effect of. So this is a very relevant and applicable to anyone in recovery or anyone walking the spiritual journey. This is usually how these things go. But what he goes on to actually say is that every human being in their life will at some point will be faced with an opportunity. They'll have a point in time where they have to choose whether to surrender and just walk the path of truth, walk the path of spirituality, walk the path of love, and find the truth of God, or knowingly turn back into suffering and pain and misery and mourning and be lost in it. Now, they might get another opportunity later on down the road, but if you've been through one of these, you understand what I'm talking about, where it's a very distinct point in clarity where you have to make a choice as if you're going to do something different and try to believe those around you. That is going to give you the option to live differently and grow in different ways and find the truth about God, is how he referred to it. He said he will have to acquire an understanding of the truth, which will set him free once and for all from all of our three-dimensional limitations and their concomitants, sin, sickness, and death. So finding the truth about God, finding the truth about this power, that's where the freedom is. That's where the serenity is. That's where the true strength and power comes into play. And I can tell you that that sounds like a very tall order. That sounds like a very unrealistic thing. But I've been given new life after going through these things. I've been given new health, new growth, and a more virtuous way to live from following this way of life, from believing this, from walking this path. So it does provide that freedom that it talks about, or at least it's been my experience that it does, and it's been the experience of many that it does too. So it's just so interesting. All of the toils and pains and the worldly problems we like to wrap ourselves up in are of our own making, really. I mean, not to discount what you're experiencing in a moment by any means, but how we think about them and process these experiences and the pain we take on is purely up to us. And when we can realize that, and we can realize this truth that Emmet Fox is talking about, the truth about God and spirituality and the God of your understanding, you'll find freedom. And freedom does not mean necessarily indifference or apathy, more so. Freedom is the ability to do the right thing for the right reason because it's the right thing to do. And to get yourself out of the way and stand on principle 100%. So it's a pretty amazing thing. So excuse me. I really like how he also goes into there really is no need for man to have trouble because if you only seek God first, the trouble need never come. Right? So he's stating what I was just talking about. If we were running into trouble in our lives, it's because we're creating it. And if we were able to modify our thinking, if we're able to find that spiritual practice and that spiritual sense of gratitude and understanding, right, prior to the trouble would never come. But we don't. No, not all of us, at least. I didn't. I still regularly don't. I usually have to find the painful solution first before I find the effective solution and the freeing solution. So we get to start to practice differently, though, is the thing. If it's been from my observation that most people, and this has been my personal story, have a painful experience that first brings them the truth. And then after that, they start to balance out. I will say that I've had experiences of actually just having true appreciation and spiritual understanding about things in my life, and I've never had to suffer through them. But those are still in the minority for me. So I do believe what he says here. He always has the choice of learning by spiritual unfoldment or learning by painful experiences. And it is his own fault that makes the latter choice. If he makes the latter choice. So, and then he gives some examples next, which I really enjoy. Because I love it when he actually brings in examples so he can give us like a picture of what it could look like. Because just conceptually, I can wrap my mind around it around the principle and the understanding. But when you can actually say, hey, here's a very short demonstration of what we're talking about here, it makes sense because and also it relates to my life, right? I've had this experience. So it's something that I appreciate that he does. I'm going to read that first one, which is about health. As a rule, it is only when health is broken down and ordinary medical means have failed to afford relief that people seriously set about gaining the spiritual understanding of the body as the true embodiment of divine life, and that our only guarantee of overcoming sickness, ultimately death. Yet if people would turn to God and acquire something of his understanding while their health is still good, they need never be sick at all, right? So where people, or well, I'll keep it on me. I'm a person that will take the reins of my own personal health into my hands and believe that it has everything to do with what I'm doing and nothing to do with the God of my understanding. And when I do that, I tend to hurt myself. At the gym, I tend to eat the wrong things. I tend to make myself miserable by depriving myself of certain things too. And tapping my leg. But it's it doesn't always go so well. Well, it hasn't always gone so well, right? Like I've been pretty honest about the fact that I've been going through a shoulder injury. Well, guess whose fault that was? That was mine, overtraining and things like that. So, this is something that relates to me, and mine might seem more minor than most because it's I'm in relatively, or not even relatively, I'm in very good health, especially for what I've put myself through. But when I can even have something like this where it's a pinched nerve in my neck, and if it doesn't move, if the disc doesn't move back, then I might have to have surgery. Like I come to this point where I'm reminded that I'm looking in the wrong place. I come to this point where I need to realize that these people are vessels for healing and not the healers themselves necessarily. And that I need to turn to a God of my understanding and for actual guidance, right? And because I do believe that of the spirituality of this life in this world and this body, right? This is a spirit that's been given a mind and a body to use in this little place we called life. And so we have to make sure that's in right alignment. And I mean, a lot of us need acute care, like things immediately taken care of. I get that for sure. No, this is not in any way a dismissal of medicine, but you're going to keep putting yourself in situations to harm yourself if you don't take care of your spiritual nature first. I've seen it happen to many people, and I've seen the creation of self-made problems and self-made injuries and self-made sicknesses just due to a lack of spiritual understandings, I believe. So, I love that paragraph. Just that it is a very relatable example for me. And then the next one, of course, is one many people relate to as well. Again, it is usually only when people are feeling the pinch of poverty very acutely. That is when ordinary material sources of supply have dried up, that they turn to God as a last resort, and learn the lesson that the divine power really is the source, in italics, of man's supply, and all material agents are but the channels, right? It's we hear a lot about abundance mindsets. We hear a lot about positive thinking. We hear a lot about a lot of different ways to get money. Some of them quite manipulative. Some of them quite disingenuous and malicious, even, which is upsetting, but it is a sign and a nod to the selfish nature of man, of us. So, surprise, no. Disappointment, yeah, especially when the knowledge is out there. But I have come to believe that the God of my understanding works through this material world in many, many ways, and all things flow through that spiritual way of living. And it's a effort on right knowledge. I think we'll get into that actually. A right understanding and faith that allows you to cultivate a trust and a knowing that everything's going to turn out the way it's supposed to. And if you live according to the principles that you've taken on the responsibility of, you'll be surprised what happens. It's been my experience. I've been surprised more than once, especially in my recovery in my lifetime. And I don't always remember it. I like to get my hands involved with the whole money aspect of things. But most times today, I can genuinely say that I am doing better with that. That I am doing better with actually having faith in the things that need to be and faith in the things that will be and just showing up and doing what I know to be the right things. So, really enjoy that. That last line, learn the lesson that the divine power really is the source of man's supply, so the God of your understanding, and all material agents are but the channels. I say this a lot of times too. I have to make space for God to work in my life. I have to make space for the God of my understanding to work through me. You know, when I make the choice to do the right thing, to me it feels uncomfortable because it might not be the most selfish or self-serving thing that I'm used to doing. But if it's the right thing to do, I'll do it despite the uncomfortability. And that's where that's where I believe I make space for God to work. Now, all I feel is an uncomfortable truth happening that that I would have rather avoided. But sometimes in those moments, miracles can happen, is what I've found. Now, that might sound a little hard to believe, I guess. But I do believe, from my experiences, I believe that's at least one of the ways that I know that it sometimes can come to fruition to actually help somebody. So, but next, anyway, we'll go on to those were the two examples. It was health and poverty. And it's only in the times we feel the pain of bad health and sickness or acute poverty do we actually pursue spiritual solutions. And if we actually stay there, and if we actually truly entertain the idea of spiritual solutions, we can actually begin to find the spiritual problem. Because it's called a spiritual solution because there's a spiritual problem. It's the solution that we need to look for. So we need to actually figure out where we fall down, right? So, and then we go into then he goes into how this is the most foundational and important lesson to actually learn is this understanding of where the source is, where everything flows from. And he says a reference to in my house there are many mansions. And what he's saying with this is until this lesson is truly learned and truly embraced, and you believe this in your soul and your core, not just following it through with the actions because it looks good or you're hoping it'll come true. I mean, that's a place to start. But until you fully embody this in the sense of you believe this and you act on this belief, and to the point where it's a knowing, it's not even a belief is just what we need until we actually know that it's truth, right? It's a placeholder for knowing. So there comes a point, and I believe I've came to that point in a couple of areas of my life where it is a knowing, where I don't have to run it through a filter of what I believe. I know honesty will always provide the best solution. I know that kindness and love will always be more powerful than any other reaction. I could manifest. So, this is a very important point. This is a very foundational topic. This is a very crucial thing to proceed further. And he says you can't proceed into these greater mansions until you have full dominion over the one you're in. You really have to open your heart, open your soul, open yourself, your mind, and have that willingness to believe something different. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy. It needs to be understood and known. So, next thing I'm just following along with the notes I took. If you can recognize God as source of all, there need be no suffering, as long as spiritual truth is pursued. That's a hell of a statement, isn't it? It's a hell of an understanding or a thought process. If you recognize God as the source of all, there need be no suffering. Because you don't need to wish it was different. You don't need to selfishly or egotistically try to change things. It's just what it is. You don't need to carry that burden on your back anymore. You just have to live well, and then whatever's supposed to work out will work out. It's not necessarily intuitive for many. It definitely wasn't for me for a long time, and it isn't always for me by any means. I still have a hard time getting in my own way, as I've said before today. But it's something that the more I practice it, the less mourning and less suffering I have, and the more freedom and peace that I am able to stay in. It's kind of amazing. It's actually truly amazing to be able to see the immediate results from practicing and believing in this and knowing this. It's really as simple as that. But I still won't do it. I'll still think I've got to fix the world and set the world right to what I would need it to be. And I cause myself quite a bit of suffering for that, to be fair. So, he goes on in this paragraph to say, if prosperous people will now, while they are still prosperous, acknowledge God as their true source and pray regularly for still more spiritual understanding on this point, they need never suffer poverty or financial trouble at all. At the same time, they must be careful to use their present resources well, not hoarding riches selfishly, but recognizing that God is the owner and that they are only the stewards or trustees for him. The command of money involves a responsibility which you cannot evade. You must dispense it wisely or take the consequences, right? So, first of all, again, he says money's not the bad thing here. It is the love of money. It is the covetous nature we have towards money, the greedy nature that we have towards money, right? But the blessings that we have, if we're truly grateful for them and understand that they have flowed to us from a God of our understanding through various vessels and actions, that we will never have to suffer because of them. But we have to keep the right perspective. We have to keep the right order of things, right? We don't want to develop an attachment to the things that God's put in our lives, right? We don't want to create false gods out of the blessing that God's given us, right? The false god of money, the false god of prestige, of pride, of popularity, of pick anything, vanity, right? Like, it can be many, many things that we get blessed with, that we take and we pedestalize and we turn into this idol and forget that we were given gifts to use for the purpose that the God of our understanding has intended, right? To be of service to him and to those around us. So when we take them upon ourselves and we leave them in our own grasp and leave them as a point of pride for us to cling to, that becomes a problem. And again, he says about money, you have a responsibility if you have money. If you have wealth, you are responsible to use it wisely and for the right things. And if you don't, it will cause you more pain, right? It might not even be immediately taken away or lost, but the obsession with money and keeping it is so damaging. It is so painful. It causes fear for many and anxiety and ridicule. It shapes their personality. So remember, keep these blessings in their correct priority. Understand where they come from and understand what their intention is, what they're intended for, more so. So I want to read this last paragraph here. Well, second to last paragraph, I guess, honestly. This general principle applies to every one of our difficulties, not merely physical or financial troubles, which is we've talked about extensively at this point, but all other ills to which flesh is heir. Family troubles, quarrels, and estrangements, right? So bringing God into your family, be grateful for your family. Sin and remorse and all the rest need never come at all if we seek first the kingdom of God and right understanding. But if we will not do so, then come they must, right? And for us, this morning will be a blessing in disguise, for through it we can become comforted. Right there, we're getting to the second part of this now, right? So this is why this beatitude is so cool to me, right? So if we practice this faith and this gratitude and this right prioritization and recognize the God of your understanding as the source of all things, then you don't have to do that suffering. But should you not, by happenstance, not do this or forget this priority, or not even realize maybe that you're making this thing this idol, making this thing this false god. Sometimes you can do that. People do it all the time by accident. They didn't realize how it was creeping up on them. This is where suffering is a blessing. Because what the suffering does, what this mourning does, it brings us to a point of recognition and understanding that we've lost the way, that we've distanced ourselves from this God of our understanding. Somehow. It's a red flag. It's a huge banner, lighted up sign flashing, a warning sign that there's something wrong, that we're doing something wrong. We're out of alignment. We're out of touch with God, whatever that may be. You know, I think it's funny that he uses divine and source in this book a lot, because these are the common terms that many use: the source, the energy, the universe, that all these things, you know, that I believe God gets called. It's all the same thing. I believe it all flows from the same place, and people just, whatever their experience might be, even could be nature, finally get that experience with this power, and they associate their perspective, right? So I mean, my perspective, as much as I'd like to say it's correct, or as much I'd like to say it's properly in the proper perspective, is very tainted by my own personal experience. But I can tell you, because of my own personal experience, the way it manifested gave me this beautiful experience of what God is. Now, I believe that experience is probably the same for everybody, but what it looks like to get there is really a defining thing. Though I do believe that what we're talking about right now are spiritual truths and realities that apply to all. So I am probably biased, but but objectively, I know this is the truth. So anyway, so we're talking about the family and everything like that, but after he does that, we'll seek family, troubles, quarrels, and strange sin and remorse and all the rest. We will never come at all if we will seek first the kingdom of God and right understanding. So the peace and the understanding of God. So the correct perspective, keeping these things in proper alignment and proper knowledge. And then when we've strayed away, when we've encountered mourning, when we've encountered suffering, when we've encountered failure, when we've encountered the pain of loss, we get this warning sign and these red flags, and we turn back to truth. We turn back to this spiritual understanding. We suddenly are comforted. We find that truth we talked about earlier on in this podcast. We find that beautiful understanding. So when we say, blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted, right? You're not forgotten about. You've just lost your way. And when you turn back to the God of your understanding and embrace that again, you will find comfort and peace. And it's only as far away as your perspective, which sometimes seems like the longest journey you can take. But the more you identify this, the more you work with this, the quicker you get at it, has been my experience. So we need to seek the kingdom of God and right understanding. And then we will find that comfort that this Beatitude talks about. And by the last sentence of that paragraph is, and by comfort, the Bible means the experience of the presence of God, which is the end of all mourning. That serenity that can come only from a God of your understanding. So I like that last line too, the last paragraph. The Orthodox churches have too often taught a crucified Christ finishing on the cross, but the Bible gives us the risen Christ triumphant. So there's life after these things. There's life after mourning. There's life after the death of a relationship or the loss of something in your life, right? Like, this is not the end of it all. This is not the last stop, right? There's a quote from a Kansas song, there'll be peace when you are done, right? If you're still suffering, keep seeking and be willing to turn back to that spiritual truth and understanding, regardless of the way you want things to go. And you will find that peace. It really is a great way to end this, right? So the mourning is never the end. The loss is never the end. There will always be peace and life after this, though we don't necessarily know what that looks like all the time. And it doesn't always look like we want it to look. I think that's probably the most difficult thing to accept. It doesn't always look how we have envisioned our future to look. And well, that's okay. It's at least okay if I let it be okay. And it's one of the most encouraging things that I could ever really, truly embrace, is that if it still hurts, they're still seeking, because the peace and the serenity and the strength and love of a God of my understanding is the true resolution of my mourning. So, all right. Well, there we go. I was going to try to make this one shorter, but I ended up making it longer. I apologize for that. I'll try to work on that. There's just so much in these paragraphs and these pages to actually talk about and dissect. I hope y'all keep sticking with me for them, and I really do appreciate y'all's time and having a listen. So I will be back again next weekend for the next one, which is Blessed Are the Meek. This is a good one. I'm very excited to do this one again, or to read this one again and to do it on this podcast. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That is I'm excited to reread that one, actually, because there's been a lot of talk about that word meek in the self-help internet YouTube world. And so I'm excited to read this one again. So, but thank you all again for joining me. I appreciate it. Give us a like, give me a subscribe. Check out the Facebook page. This is also going to be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And please just let us know what you think. You would appreciate it, and I'm grateful for everybody that jumps on and gives a little bit of their time to this thing. So that's all for now, and until next time, thanks.